Okay, so for FND Awareness 2025, today we're talking to Tess about her experiences with FND. So hi Tess, thank you for your time. Can you tell me a bit about your FND? So how it started for you, what your symptoms were?
Yeah, absolutely. So my symptoms started in 2020. I was working a very, very stressful corporate job and working a lot of hours and a lot of travel as well. And I seemed to be just never catching my breath and never,
Yeah,
just always stressed.
yeah.
And I ended up having to travel to a work area that was pretty precarious at the time. The company I was working for had a death of a child. It was a childcare center company,
Okay, wow.
and so that had happened in the February March. It was also around the closing time of COVID, so there was a
Yeah,
lot of unknowns.
yeah, a lot of stress.
And so I was asked to travel to the region. I worked in facility management, so I was looking at properties and everything like that. And I had nothing to do with the children. It
Okay.
never kind of crossed my mind that I wasn't kind of safe. I wasn't kind of, because I had nothing to do with the families, the children, the anything else. And so I was actually assaulted by a child when I went up
Oh,
um,
wow.
to the region, which sounds funny to say.
Like
I got
physically assaulted?
physically
Okay.
assaulted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I
Mm.
got hit in the face by a child and then
Okay.
fell back and hit my head on a concrete
Oh, wow.
bathroom
Yeah.
floor.
Okay.
And my diagnosis originally, I had a mild traumatic brain injury. And while that had its own kind of look and feel about it as well, I started having some very unusual symptoms. And, I was very kind of confused and would, for the first kind of week or two, kept waking up on the floor.
Okay. Like falling out of bed.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
And I didn't really have much to go off at that point because I was still traveling for work. So
Oh, wow.
um, it was the last day into my trip. I was going home. I knew everything was going to be all right. I was going home to my husband. And it wasn't until I was home on my second night that I actually had a seizure in my sleep.
Oh, okay. And your
Yeah. So
husband picked that up?
so my
Yeah.
husband, of course, when I was home, he was the
Mm.
one that kind of recognized what was kind of going
Going
on.
on. Yeah.
An ambulance was called and all of that. And
Mm.
I was in hospital for, I think it was about 10
Mm-hmm.
days, 12 days at
Yeah.
first.
Yeah.
With every test under the sun, everything. And at the end of it, I kind of I just kept having these three letters kind of told to me, FND, you have FND. And I was like,
What is that?
what is that?
Yep.
Like I was like, okay, well,
What is it? What does it
yeah,
mean?
what is it? What is it? What
Yeah.
does it mean? What does
What
it
does it
mean
mean?
for
What
me
does my
going
life hold for
forward?
me? Yeah.
So it was really I want to say quite a surreal time.
Mm.
Um, I'd done 25 years of jujitsu at that stage. I had, I'd always been very athletic, very,
Very fit. Yeah.
yeah,
And were you
yeah,
healthy before then?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I had never so much as anything more than a migraine.
Mm.
No, never.
Mm.
So it was just, um, yeah, it was pretty intense and it was pretty horrible.
Yeah.
Uh, doctors, uh, I found that doctors were quite dismissive once I heard those three letters.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
I like having previously worked for like Pfizer Pharmaceuticals and things like that. intrinsically, I knew deep down in my mind, doctors aren't intrinsically bad people, so I'm like, well, okay, they're saying this for a reason. But I still didn't really know what it was. I was still kind of pretty confused. I was pretty, I wanted to almost say dopey, like that.
You hadn't heard of this condition before you got diagnosed?
Never heard of it before.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty common.
Yeah.
Often the first time we hear about the condition is when you get the label.
Yeah. And I didn't get the label for about, I want to say, it would have been about 10 days.
Yeah.
So, I'd been poked and prodded and moved from ward to ward.
Not really knowing what's going on.
Not knowing a thing. And I had been put on a mountain of medication, which made me feel even dopier.
Yeah.
So when it came to discharge and they're saying, right, you've got FND, you need to go home, there's nothing more we can do, I was like, well, hang on a second, you're telling me that I'm on anti-epileptics, antidepressants, anti-everything, but I don't have epilepsy.
You don't have epilepsy, but you're given epileptic medication.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's confusing.
So, because I was really confused, my husband was my biggest advocate at that point.
Yeah, awesome.
And he was there the morning of discharge, of course, and the neurologist team came around and they said to him, look, we're going to keep her on low dose anti-epileptics. And for me, they were the ones that were causing really the most damage in as to who I was. Like he couldn't recognize me. I couldn't recognize me. They were awful.
So in terms of like fatigue or dopiness, energy.
Cognition.
Yeah, cognition.
Like I just couldn't function.
Couldn't think.
I couldn't have a conversation. I couldn't anything.
Yeah.
And so the neurologist looked at my husband and said, look, it's a very, very low dose. It's not going to harm her even if she doesn't have epilepsy. So, we're going to keep her on them. And my husband turned around and deadpan looked him in the face and said, if it's that harmless, you put it on your breakfast and see how you function. And if you can do that, then we'll keep taking them. And from that day, I stopped taking the anti-epileptics.
Okay. Yep. And did that make you did it improve your cognitive function, do you think?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. For me, it definitely did improve. Because very early on, they did diagnose me with epilepsy, frontal lobe epilepsy. So
and was that from testing, or did they diagnose you based on your seizures?
No, that was from testing. So they actually did. He's one of Australia's most well-known. I'm not going to drop names because it's not fair. Yeah. But he does write an awful lot of textbooks.
Yep.
I had an appointment with this gentleman, and he did everything old school way. So he didn't have one of these nice shiny EEGs. He had the ones with the pins that kind of go up and down and all over the place. And I'd never actually seen one that looked like that. And he did the study, and he said straight off the bat, you have epilepsy. And my entire world stopped at that point. And from that point to FND, it was about a month. But that was a very kind of damaging month for me emotionally, because my entire life stopped. There was no training, there was no driving, there was no freedom.
It's huge. Huge impact on your life. Yeah.
That's not to say that I want to say a diagnosis of FND is any less. It certainly wasn't. But I think by the time I had processed the emotions of epilepsy, I kind of didn't really have anything left to give when I was told I had FND.
And you were told you had FND instead of epilepsy at that point?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I, at that stage, had participated in a study with Melbourne, with one of the universities in Melbourne.
Oh, yeah.
And they had sent me this nice technological little camera thing that I had to wear on my head constantly for a week.
Mm-hmm.
And they had recorded seizures in my sleep. Mine
Yep.
only ever happened in my sleep.
Okay.
There were a few times where I had syncope awake,
Mm-hmm.
but never seizures. The seizures were in my sleep. So yeah, it was a very interesting time around initial diagnosis.
Did you have any other symptoms like motor impairments, problems with walking?
Yeah. So I very, very early on, I had a lot of sensation problems. So a lot to do with not being able to coordinate limbs, losing sensation in feet would often lead to falling.
Mm-hmm.
Like waking up in the morning and going, oh, I can't feel my left side. That's great. So it was a very tricky time because at that stage, my husband and I lived separate to any other family. And, he was very concerned about leaving me at home, and as anyone would be.
Yeah.
But it was a hectic time to start with.
Yeah, and were you given sort of any emotional support because you're processing a new diagnosis, major impact on your function, and you spoke about, driving. Obviously, that's an issue. If you've got motor impairments, obviously that impacts your whole life, how you go about work, what you do in your life. Were you offered sort of any emotional support to process all of this?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
And on top of that, I was also fighting my employer to acknowledge the fact that I'd had an injury at work. So on top of not being able to function day to day in a way that I'd always been able to function, I was also on top of that fighting to get what I was entitled to help me get the support that I needed.
And that just makes the journey so much harder.
And it was. I fought them very hard for 2 years. And the thing was, they didn't care. It wasn't their day-to-day that had changed. The company we worked for, it wasn't even the company that had caused the injury. So I was like, why are you even fighting this? Why are you, it was recorded. It was on camera. It was
okay. There was no doubt about it.
There was no doubt about it. But it was just, they well and truly had more money than me to fight it.
And that's often the issue. Like we see that so much through our organisation. Is, often FND is initiated by a fall, an injury, a car crash, a head injury, like kids at school playing sport, that kind of stuff. It's often sort of a single incident like that triggers the whole onslaught of the condition. And when you do have to fight insurance, like the stress of that doesn't help. And it just makes it so much harder to get the support to get well. And we know with FNDs, like you need that support really early on in your journey in order to get the good outcomes.
So even though I was fighting my workplace, fighting symptoms, I felt like I was fighting the world at that point. I was very lucky to have somebody that was fighting for me.
And that's great.
Without my husband, I would not be who I am today. I would not have clawed back some semblance of normality in my life.
And we see that a lot when people have family support. People acknowledge the difference that it makes. Like you need someone in there advocating for you, especially in the hospital system, and supporting you at home, where unfortunately there are a lot of people that don't have that support. And, some people, they'll have family that don't believe them, which makes it so much worse and so much more alone.
Yeah,
So, and that's a really important point, is the family do make a difference, and
definitely.
to sort of have your back in this
Yeah.
journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was very lucky because at the end of the day, my family wanted me back.
Yeah,
You
absolutely.
know, they're not going to
Yeah.
get me back by saying, well, none of this is true.
Yeah.
I'm lucky. I've never had that. I've never been on the receiving end of somebody saying that to me.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
to be honest, I don't know how I'd feel if I did.
Mm.
But I have had the very typical, this is all in your head. And
And who were you getting that from?
generally neurologists.
Yeah.
And I decided to sit back, and I was in hospital for the second time at this stage. And the night before, I'd had a pretty bad seizure, and my husband had only just gone home. And before he went, he said to the nurses, the rails need to be up on these beds or she's going to fall out of bed. And that didn't happen. And that night I fell out of bed and shattered my kneecap.
Oh my goodness.
In hospital.
Oh wow. That's the last thing you need.
Yes. So I was fast tracked to have a knee reconstruction. But also on top of that, that was like the last thing that the hospital was like, yeah, we didn't listen. And I think I think just for those nurses alone, like if nobody else paid attention, just for those nurses alone, the three, the four that were around then, they really looked at it differently.
Okay.
You know, so they could see this wasn't voluntary. This wasn't, but you know, if the statement, it's all in your head, can make you think anything, it made me think that, holy hell, my brain is very, very powerful and we don't understand it. Sure, it might be all in my head, but
your brain's in your head.
Doing that.
Yeah. And the thing is that we do know it is in your head because the brain function is impaired. Like we do see in the research setting with functional MRIs, there are specific changes that they see in the brains of people with FND compared to people who are faking symptoms. So the brain function is very, very different in someone with FND compared to a healthy control, compared to someone who is faking symptoms. And there are specific changes in the brain, but the problem is it's not visible. You know, like when you had your broken knee, you can take a photo of it and you can see that it's broken, but we can't take a photo in the clinical setting of this damaged brain and see the challenges because it's picked up in the research setting where we're doing functional MRIs, PET scans, the sort of testing that's not done in your routine clinical setting. And so when they can't see it, they just assume it's, you know, psychological.
Yeah. Absolutely. I do want to say though, my symptoms did not start to become under control until I dived headfirst into psychological treatment. I don't get me wrong, my symptoms have not gone entirely, and I don't think I don't know. I hope one day they will. But I don't think that's how it works.
And I think we see a lot with FND is it's really how you manage it day to day.
Yes.
Not so much that it goes away, and like we were talking about, you know, recovery, you know, you can sort of recover from a cold and your immune system get a cold, your immune system fights the cold and you recover and you get back to what you were before. But with FND, we do have changes in the brain. And yes, we can work with our sort of self-management strategy so we don't overdo it and make the problem worse. But it often, for many people, it's around how they manage their life, themselves, their health, what they do to keep the symptoms at bay. Yeah. And I think really anyone that's had FND is always vulnerable to, you know, having a relapse.
Yeah.
Can you go through good times and bad times? You know, sometimes people are sort of impaired all the time. Sometimes
Yes.
people are up and down, depending on how
Yes.
well they're managing. You know, and they talk about, you know, maybe kids do have better outcomes, but for a lot of people, it is something that they need to manage and something that can sort of raise its ugly head at any point.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think for the most part, I am up majority of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But if for example, I thought it was a really good idea, well, not even a good idea. I desperately wanted to go see the last Elton John tour,
Mm-hmm.
and I did.
Yeah.
And I had a fabulous time, and I
Awesome.
paid for 3 days.
Yeah.
But it was
But it was worth it.
so worth it.
And that's also how we do manage it. Like, you don't want to sort of, you know, wrap yourself in bubble wrap and not move
Yeah.
and not do anything. It's like planning. I don't know if you found that there was a lot of planning around how do I prepare to go to this, but then how do I
Yes.
give myself the recovery time so
Yes.
that, yes, it will impact me, but I've got time to recover afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is exactly what it looks like.
Yeah.
I don't have too much of that now as such. I think it's just become inherently easier as time's gone on. I've become better at it.
Yeah.
So it's become more natural.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean I don't miss out on doing the things that I love doing. I have tried to go back to jiu-jitsu, and something I did since I was 7 years old.
Yeah.
I have tried multiple times, and even just physically being back there is enough to trigger
Symptoms.
an emotional response.
Okay.
And I find those emotional responses, whether they're really, really good or really, really bad, are what triggers my symptoms the most.
And that is something like people will often say, oh, I had a symptom or I had a seizure, but I was really happy.
Yeah.
And that's because we have problems, like what they see in the brain is the amygdala, which is like your emotional center. If you have a negative emotional response, it can sort of hijack the motor area of the brain.
Yeah.
But if you have a positive emotional response, it can also do the same.
It can do the same
so
thing.
It's just like you're activating your amygdala. You're activating your amygdala. So you're having motor symptoms because we have this hyperconnectivity between your limbic, your emotional center, and the motor part of the brain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So trying to explain to somebody that it doesn't matter whether it's really, really positive or really, really negative, like it still has a very similar effect.
Yeah.
You know, and people say, so why bother? And I'm like, well, I'm not just going to stay at home and not
make
live
your world
life
very small. Yeah.
Yeah, because for a while I did. For a while I definitely you know, I found that friends and family didn't really know what was going to make things better or worse. So they were fearful. They were fearful to spend time. And, you know, I felt like my world became very small.
And it
for
can.
quite a
Absolutely
period
can.
of time.
Yeah.
But, you know, talking to friends and family now, the friends and family that I would have died to have in my world back then, they were the ones that were the most fearful, because they were like, we didn't want to see you in pain, or we didn't want to be the reason why you couldn't talk the next day, or and I completely understand that. I can't blame them for not wanting to cause harm. But I'm very lucky that all of them are back in my life again.
That's wonderful.
And
makes a difference, doesn't it?
Oh,
having
absolutely.
the supportive people around you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And they're not terrified that if I, you know, if I was to have a seizure, it's the end of the world. Like they're not terrified of things anymore.
Yeah.
And yeah, that took a long time.
And I think especially you see it like with parents and their little child having, you know, violent seizures, and it's so scary, especially at first, to witness these symptoms in your loved one.
Mm,
And when you don't know what it is and how harmful, is this going to damage this person? Do I need to give CPR? Do I need to rush them to hospital?
absolutely.
Like that, not knowing what to do is really scary for bystanders, family, friends, everyone.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I am my parents' baby. I'm the
Mm,
youngest. I've always been fit, healthy,
mm,
funny, silly, you name it.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, it was a big change for a
Mm,
while there.
yeah.
And now we're all just kind of recognizing not the old me coming through again, but the new
Mm,
who's the new me.
yeah. Yeah. And it's sort of finding yourself now, I guess, and
Yeah,
finding your new sense of identity. Did you
yes,
notice that? Because a lot of people will say, their, especially their workplace or
yeah.
what they did gave them their sense of identity. But when you can no longer do the things you used to do, how does that change who you are and how you see yourself?
For me, that was really hard because I had worked very long hours, very high functioning corporate roles ever since I was 17. I
Yeah. Wow.
yeah, I graduated school at 16 and I was very young.
Yeah.
And within 3 months, I was working as a legal compliance officer for
Wow.
Pfizer Pharmaceuticals, one of the biggest
That's
pharmaceutical
amazing.
companies in the world.
Yeah.
And I worked and worked and worked and worked and worked. And, I was able to buy a house at 20. I was,
Wow.
I was definitely not in
Mm,
a good relationship, but I was functioning and working,
mm,
and I was training, 15 hours a week, and I was running my own club, and I
wow.
had people left, right, and center in my world.
Mm.
And when I look back at it, I kind of think it was too much.
Yeah.
Like it was well and truly too much.
Yeah. And we do see that with FND. It's often the people who they push themselves with work, they push
Oh
their
yeah,
bodies. And it
yes,
sounds a bit like what you were doing, pushing your body
absolutely.
with the training, doing
Yes.
excessive amount of work. And that's really common with
Yeah.
FND or
Yeah.
people who've been in that caregiver role and they've been sort of caring for someone else really long hours during the day. It's
Yeah.
often, the body maybe is not designed for that level of strain.
To be honest, I don't think the body's designed for that level of stress.
Yeah.
I think stress is very, very harmful. I
Oh,
think
it is.
cortisol is just, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And
it's,
that's sort of what we see is, the people with the prolonged stress, people who
yes,
have that stress all the time, back in sort of animal world, it's sort of like, you know, escape from a tiger, short burst of stress and then
yeah,
relax, recover. The body's
fight
not
or flight.
designed, yeah, the body's not designed for that prolonged level of stress on it. And even if it's sort of good stress, like your training,
Yeah,
that kind of stuff, it's still
it's
strain on
still,
the body.
yeah,
Yeah. Or it could be an illness, like we see people with chronic illnesses come down with FND, like that level of strain, that physical strain on the body.
yeah,
Yeah. Mm.
yeah. So I think over the 15 years from the time I started working corporate, I probably think I'd taken maybe 2 weeks of holidays, three at the most.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Over what period of time?
oh, the 15 years.
Oh, wow.
I was
Wow.
very,
Okay. You definitely hadn't given your body a break.
no, I was obsessed with work.
Yeah.
And even when I changed from company to company, everything
No
I did,
downtime.
no,
Yeah.
I was always kind of thinking that what's the point of downtime?
Mm.
Like I could be making a difference,
Yeah.
whether it's this company or that company or doing
Mm.
whatever. I needed to always be doing something. And even I took a week off from work. I remember it was the week leading up to my black belt grading for jiu-jitsu. And I was like, right, um, I've got to prepare mentally for this. But instead of just preparing mentally, I spent the entire week training.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to the grading, well, 2 days before the grading, I ended up breaking my ankle.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And was in a moon boot for was in a cast for 3 months and then a moon boot for 6 months. And I just kind of sat back and went, well, we'll just have to work harder next time.
Oh.
Like my brain did not
Yeah, it didn't register.
put two and two together that, like, seriously, you've just got to stop for
Yeah.
a period of time.
And look, sometimes it's sort of like, how is the universe going to tell you to take a break?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I can remember similar, like I once fell and shattered my knee, and that stopped me tried to stop me for a period of time, but it didn't. I kept going.
Oh yeah. I still
Yeah.
went to training with a moon boot on.
Yeah.
I was
Didn't
stupid.
learn your lesson.
Yeah. I was not very good at taking no for an answer.
Yeah.
And then the following year, when my black belt was booked in for the next grading, my moon boot only came off 4 days before the grading.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So the only way that I was allowed to do it was if my physiotherapist was there.
Okay.
And he taped, iced, cut, retaped, iced, cut all day. Because it was a 9-hour grading. So
Wow.
yeah. And then I was at work the next day. So
Yeah.
it's stupidity, really.
So sort of like you really burnt out your body
Oh, well and truly.
before FND. You then had
Yes.
the knock to the head,
Yes.
which set it off.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it was a very stressful time to work for this company. The death of a child is just,
It's huge.
oh, it's
Yeah. It
massive.
would have shattered a lot of people.
It had huge impacts on all of us, even though,
Yeah.
for 90% of us, we would never have known this child, known their family,
Yeah.
known anything about it.
Has wide impacts.
But it's like, well, hang on a second. That's a little child. That's so you slow your brain down and you kind of sit and you think, and the more you sit and think, the worse it kind of gets. And it was a very, very stressful time to work for or around this company. Obviously, I didn't work directly for them, but I was based in their office. I was on and off their sites day in, day out. And then on top of it, we had COVID. So there was a lot of
stresses. Yeah.
Is the world coming to an end? Are we shutting down? Are we,
will it ever get back to normal?
Yeah, exactly. It was a very crazy time.
It was, yeah.
And it was just, it's unusual that it took a pandemic to sit me on my butt and go, can you just stop?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until then that I really started to slow down in what I was doing. We weren't allowed to go to sites every day. We weren't, for health reasons. We all had to kind of isolate and everything. And that was for the first time I kind of started to get sick. I was like, hang on, I'm not going I'm not going on and off sites, and hang on, why have I got this cold, and why have I got so my
it all sort of caught up on you.
to kind of
break down.
Just go, you are going to stop. So
forced it on you.
Pretty much. And then a couple of months later, and head injury, and that's about where it all came from.
Yeah. And then with the treatment that you access for FND, you mentioned psychology. What other forms of treatment did you access?
So I dived headfirst into physical therapy, occupational therapy, really a lot of physical motor related therapies, because for me at that time my obsession was I need to get back to jiu-jitsu. I need to, and from the very limited information that I could find in 2020, I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
So I, financially, I was able to just keep throwing money at physio and everything, everything you could imagine.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until probably, I'd say, month 3 or 4, probably the end of month 3, we ended up at the hospital because I had what had I done? I think I dropped a piece of marine ply and it landed on the top of my foot. And I had broken a bone
Oh
in the
my
top of my
goodness,
foot.
not another break.
Oh yeah, I had quite a few
You've
breaks.
got a few breaks,
I had a
yep.
few breaks through this process. Yep.
Yeah. Oh.
And I was very like, I was really upset, and I just kept getting more and more upset about it because I'm like, oh great, here we go, another cast, another this, another that. And the doctor that saw me in the ED was actually a client of the gym that my mum runs.
Okay.
And so he was a healthcare professional seeing me in AM care. And he said, look, I don't know a lot about FND. I'm not going to pretend to. But from what I have seen, the people that have better outcomes acknowledge that it's all in their head.
Oh.
And that was the first time I'd heard that statement. And I kind of sat back and thought about it and talked to mum about it a lot and talked to my husband about it a lot. And because I had worked in the medical industry from a young age, I was like, well, intrinsically, I don't think he's trying to be harmful. What is it about this statement that upsets me? And what is it about this statement that I'm reluctant to acknowledge? So I really had to kind of sit back and go, okay, well, I'm reading this all over social media. I've heard it from other FND individuals because I joined a support group and was going along and trying to figure out what on earth day-to-day looked like. And I was surrounding myself in information of it, but there was this one statement that a lot of people kept coming back to, but nobody wanted to hear it. And I'm like, why does this statement keep coming up, but I don't want to acknowledge it? And I had to kind of take stock on that because, and it was hard because at first I thought maybe they're doing it to be hurtful. And I'm like, why would a doctor, what would any person benefit from being hurtful to another human being? I've always been one of those very look for the best in everyone kind of people, always, my whole life. And so I sat back and I said to my husband, maybe there's actually some truth to this. Maybe they're not trying to say you're making it up. Maybe they're trying to say that your brain is more powerful than you think.
Yeah. And that's
maybe
the
they're
thing.
saying it because they don't even really understand why they're saying it, but they're acknowledging something medical that we don't know yet.
Yeah.
And
they're not breaking down that statement.
Exactly.
Like for the start of it, we know that FND is caused by problems in the brain and your brain is in your head. So obviously, but are they saying you're making it up? Are they saying you can use your mind to help control this? And we know your mind is powerful in terms of function. Like even, your athletes will use meditation and visualization to visualize their performance.
Yes.
And there have been studies where like they had people playing the piano and practicing playing the piano, and then they had people visualizing and mentally mapping out playing the piano, and the brain activity and the like the activity in the brain and then the sort of function was the same. So visualizing something in your brain can be really powerful. That sort of mind control can be powerful, the way you use parts of your brain.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah. So I kind of, during that period, I kind of focused a lot on like breaking down that statement, because we were, you know, a lot of people in the group had been saying over and over again, well, you know, I'm not making this up. And I'm like,
they're not
but maybe
specifically
that's not what
saying,
they're saying.
yeah,
Maybe they don't know what they're trying to say, but they just know it's something to do with the brain,
yeah,
you know. And that was the way I chose to see it, because if I
yeah,
didn't choose to see it, then I had to acknowledge that they were being harmful. And
yeah,
I didn't want to acknowledge that, because my world was now surrounded with doctors.
yeah,
If I have been very, very, very lucky, because when my FND diagnosis came back in and I was sent back to my neurologist that had originally diagnosed me with epilepsy, he had a GP that he recommended I go to. And I was kind of lost in the wind at that point, because my GP that had known me since I was, well, born, had gone, I don't know how to look after you. You know, we're going to have to find a new GP.
Wow.
And I was like, I felt isolated and deserted.
Yeah,
And I'm
yeah,
like, okay. And if I had not have gone and seen this GP, my life would look very different.
okay.
He has supported every decision I've made.
Excellent.
He has, every time I have said, no, I'm sorry, but that medication is not staying. He supported that.
Excellent.
He made himself available for 7 days over Christmas to help me detox from all medications.
Oh, wow.
When I wanted to. He was on call, and he's on call for me at any time.
Wow. That's
And
definitely something unique.
he truly is an absolutely amazing human being. And without him, my husband and I would not be where we are now.
Yeah.
We are a very, very strong dynamic couple. But without that medical support, I don't know what it would look like.
Yeah. And that's what a lot of people struggle to get, is a good GP who is with them on the journey.
Absolutely.
Too many GPs will just throw up their hand and go, well, I don't know what this is. I don't know what to do.
My GP did exactly the same. My excellent
Previous,
GP.
yeah.
He did that the very first day I walked into his office. He said to me, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to find out. And he took himself away for a 4-day conference with a medical company and learned all about it.
Awesome.
Everything he could get his hands on, he read.
Wow.
Everything he could do to support me, he did.
Yeah.
Every service he could get me into, he would. He searched for studies and research fellows and everything he could possibly do to make my life easier.
That's fantastic.
He's amazing. And still to this day, he does not see himself as an FND specialist. He sees himself as a GP. And I like to think that in his books, GP stands for great person.
Oh, wow.
It's
That's
not a general
nice.
practitioner.
That's so cool. That's excellent.
He's an
I'm
absolutely
looking for a great person. That's really good. Yeah. And
great person. And without him kind of pushing me towards some of the more neurological type things, he said, what harm can it be to try?
Yeah.
And I said,
give
there's
it a
no
go.
harm. I just didn't know kind of what to choose or what to do. And he first pushed me towards cognitive behavioral therapy, which I did find very, very useful. I've never been able to do meditation. I've never been able to
Okay.
meditate my whole life.
Mm-hmm.
My brain does not stop making noise ever.
Yeah, very busy.
It's
Yeah.
just, at 34, I was diagnosed with ADHD as well, which looks very,
Okay.
very different in girls than
Yeah.
boys.
Yeah.
But my whole life, my brain is not shut up. It
Yeah.
just talks constantly.
There's one
And
thing we do see with FND is a lot of, especially with the females, your late diagnosis of autism and your late diagnosis of ADHD, because your girls' neurodiversity presents differently to boys, and the
very
little
different.
boys get that treatment because it's so obvious.
A lot
But
of
the
theirs is the
girls, yeah,
hyperactivity as opposed
yeah,
to, yeah,
yeah.
it's quite interesting stuff.
Mm.
So I dived headfirst into CBT, and I found that I was able to recognize symptoms earlier
Mm.
and give myself a much better opportunity to get on top of them. So
So
whether
is that
that
how the
was,
CBT worked for you, is identifying triggers, identifying sort of
yes,
things that place me at risk? So helping
yes,
you with that sort of self-management of symptoms and
yeah,
triggers.
yeah.
Yeah,
So the CBT helped with like early recognition of triggers, or like
yeah.
if I keep going down this route,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be in an awful kind of yucky
Mm.
spiral.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was recommended to something called CBIT,
Yep.
or Comprehensive Behavioral Intervention of Tics,
Mm-hmm.
which is generally used for Tourette's.
Yep.
It's a very interesting, um, very, very interesting type of therapy. And I was like, well, why would I participate in that? I don't have Tourette's. But I actually found it more helpful than CBT.
Okay.
Because when my body was starting to become overwhelmed with signals, the CBIT side of things really taught me to ground, and to find something that I could latch onto
Mm-hmm.
that would help me reduce the impact of what it was going to look like. Um, and I'm very, very proud to be able to say it's been 14 months since I last had a seizure.
That's fantastic.
And that's
Really good.
a lot of that is because I do recognize the psychology side of it. I don't want to say that psychology is the be all and end all of FND. It's not.
Mm.
Um, and I was very, very lucky to be able to afford to
Mm.
do majority of this privately because it's not available publicly.
Yeah, that's true.
But um, but if I didn't, I think that's why a lot of people end up where they do end up.
Yeah,
The services are not cheap.
yeah.
Um,
And with
the
most
availability
people,
is
yeah,
not.
people not being able to afford treatment, not being able to work, not having
Yes.
any Medicare rebates, treatment not being accessible, you can
Yep.
sort of see people are almost set up to fail in the
Absolutely.
current, environment for treatment,
Yeah.
because if we invested in early FND treatments where you could get this treatment no matter whether you could afford it or not,
Yes.
it would make a big difference to people's
Longevity.
long-term outcomes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think if I wasn't as stubborn
Mm.
as I am,
Yeah.
I would not have made the kind of,
Progress.
I wouldn't have clawed back
Yeah.
as much as I have. I still have bad days. I am by no means cured.
Yeah.
I am not the poster girl for curing FND,
Mm.
but I am definitely, I want to challenge people with FND to look at that statement very differently,
Yeah.
because if you don't, you'll always be hurt by
Mm.
that statement. And I certainly was hurt the first few times too.
Yeah. And I
But
think
if,
it's how they say it. Like they're not really going, okay, well, this is what I mean by this statement and what can
yeah,
you do about it? And too often it's sort of like, oh, it's in your mind, seek psychology. Well, it's like, well, we know that the brain, like there is research around the changes in the brain with FND, but it's how can you use your brain powerfully to help with improvement. And even, I mean, there's books like The Brain That Changes Itself by Norman Doidge. So that's around, you know, for people with Parkinson's and MS, so where there's clear changes in the brain, how they've managed to, I guess, activate different parts of the brain in order to improve their function. And people who might have been wheelchair bound with Parkinson's, you know, been walking and doing some great things. So it's like, how can we use our brain to support our recovery rather than being a victim to the illness, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I don't, at no stage through this process have I allowed myself to say that I'm a victim of FND. I'm not a victim. Absolutely not.
I think it makes people stronger. You have to be stronger to live with it.
I'm stubborn. I am so stubborn. Sometimes it's helpful.
Sometimes it's not.
Sometimes it's not.
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah, well, yeah, no.
Some of us more than others, yep.
I think my poor mother, she thought she had another few months before I started walking, but I was walking at 8 months.
Oh, okay.
She just said, I've always been stubborn.
Yeah.
But she is too. And if I had not have stood my ground and said, I'm the master of this brain and only I can control it. It's easier said than done.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I don't pretend to be very good at it or great at it by any stretch. But I do own the fact that if I had have stayed in that mental space that I thought healthcare professionals were just trying to cause harm, that statement was all just because they didn't want to deal with it, I would be exactly where I was 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And that wasn't going to happen. It took me 2 years to get to a place where I had reduced my medication from 13 medications a day to 2.
That's
and
big.
I couldn't have done that without
medical support. Yeah.
GP that we were talking about before.
And that's true, you know, when you're on 13 different medications, there's so many medications have side effects, and then they can interact with each other and, you know, compound effects or reduce
that
effects.
That was the problem.
You don't know what symptoms, symptoms and what's medication.
Every time they added one, there would be another symptom. And then they'd give me another medication to counteract that symptom.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I got to the stage where I felt like a zombie that I was just like, no, enough. And my GP actually said to me, I've been hoping you'd get to this point, but I needed you to decide when it's the right time.
Okay, awesome.
And that's when, I think we spoke to each other every single day over the Christmas break of 2022 to 2023.
That's amazing. That's a very, very, very rare GP.
He is incredible.
Yeah.
He was a surgeon previously, and he wants to retire as a GP, but he's the best human that's walked into our lives.
Okay.
And he's without a change in mental process, without you've got to be the master of your ship. Nobody can tell you, if you allow what everybody in the FND community says to kind of get you down or control, you'll never make a change. And that was where, as much as I loved the people that I went to the community group with, I had to stop. because every time I went, somebody would end up in tears.
Yeah.
And somebody else would end up saying that they got told they were making it up. And somebody else, and I got to a point where I recognized that was not good for my health or my journey.
Yeah.
Because my journey, I was not just going to sit back and go, okay, well, this is what it is. I refuse to do that. I refuse to allow something to control me that I don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able, capable. I wanted to be in command.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's also, you talk about being in command, sort of like self-agency. They talk about in FND, part of the brain that's not working properly is a temporal parietal junction, and that is around self-agency. And so it's like people with FND, like this is clearly malfunctioning in the brain, so they have no self-agency over their movements. So then if that sort of then expands to no self-agency over your life, no self-agency over my access to treatment, my access to care, and then feeling like there's all these negative forces on you, it sort of increases the impact of that problem with your self-agency in the brain. So being able to sort of claw back some of that control can be really helpful in giving you that sense of agency, which might help to activate that area of your brain.
And look, I don't want people to think that, first of all, this was not easy. It wasn't. And there were so many days where I sat back and cried and felt like I was never going to make progress. And I don't want people to think that it's easy. It's not. I don't want people to think that just because they didn't start doing that right from the beginning, that it's too late. Because it's not. And I don't want people to think that just because my story looks different to theirs, that their story is any less worth telling. Because FND is horrid. It is awful. And I've chosen during this talk to not focus on rehashing all of my symptoms. And I had a myriad of symptoms, an absolute myriad. But nobody benefits from me telling them about them. Because that triggers people. It really does. The last thing I want to do is be a trigger for people. Unless it's a trigger for change. And that's what
I like that, triggered for change. It's like taking, I guess, what was helpful in your recovery and how can we, I guess, expand that. And one of them would be, you know, having support around you, like having the support of your medical professionals, having the support of your family, having people who believe in you.
Healthcare professionals that some days I would walk into appointments and go, oh, for goodness sake, I'm just over it. And then walking into the next appointment and going, hey, how you going? Like, I am very, very lucky with the people that I have in my life. I have a husband that is just incredible. I have my mum, who is my best friend.
That's wonderful.
And she and I, everybody that has met my mum has gone, Jesus Christ, you're lucky. My mum is tenacious and she is stubborn. And that is exactly where I get it from. I've got my dad who absolutely adores me. And, you know, my sister and my brother-in-law and all of my family have all been there for me.
And that just makes such a difference.
It really does.
And we've heard that. I've done surveys and people have said having family, supportive family, makes such a difference, you know.
But I can't stress enough that just because you don't have that, if you don't have that, that it's not possible.
Yeah.
Because it is.
And it's also, I guess, how you create, like you'd have your blood family, but it's how you create your family around you, whether it's friendships, animals, where.
And what you consider as family.
Exactly.
Family doesn't have to be blood.
It doesn't have to be blood.
Biology.
Yeah.
Family is what you make it.
And it's also around having positive interactions around you that I think make a difference, whether it's animals, people, or family.
Absolutely.
It's being in an environment where you feel safe, like sort of, we haven't brought up safety, but feeling safe is really important. Because when your body's under threat, it sort of exacerbates your nervous system arousal. So feeling safe is really important. So having safe family around you, safe interactions with your medical health professionals can make a big difference in sort of soothing the nervous system and reducing symptoms.
I couldn't imagine what it, well, when I was first diagnosed, I was anxious before any doctor's appointment. Very anxious. I would get very overwhelmed because I was sitting here going, what's he going to say to me today?
And it's putting the power with them.
Absolutely. And I'm like, whatever they said to me back then, it wasn't out of determination to be painful. It wasn't that they were determined to cause harm. It was, I think it may be like they don't know. They don't get it.
Yeah, they don't know. And
no.
I mean, we've had some name changes. The research for FND, like, it has lagged behind every other condition out there. So people who trained decades ago actually don't know. No. It's only if you stay up to date with the latest literature, if it's your area of interest, that you'd have any idea. Otherwise, it's just assumptions. And they go, well, we can't see it on a scan. And you go, okay, well, psychology was helpful. Okay, well, therefore, psychology must be the answer for people. So, they don't know.
No.
And I think it's also for health professionals, like being honest when you don't know. It's like, well, we don't know, but we could give it a try. Let's see. Being open and willing and giving things a go. And if it doesn't work, okay, well, we tried, but maybe we'll try something else.
And I think it's hard when I was first diagnosed, I very much felt like a guinea pig. Which is funny because I ended up buying guinea pigs. So they ended up becoming my my furry little companions. Don't get me wrong, I've got 3 big Australian bulldogs, but if they don't want to cuddle, they're not going to cuddle. Like, they are 40 kilos of muscle. And when I wanted to cuddle, I'd just go get one of the pigs and I'd sit down and I'd give them a snuggle and they'd be happy and I'd be happy. And
soothing.
Soothing
for the nervous system.
They're my furry little companions. And I think animals have a very, very big place in healing. I really do.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree. I'm an animal person, but I'd absolutely agree. And they're so, like, they're non-judgmental. They can't say anything that's going to hurt us or that we can take the wrong way.
I would definitely agree with that until you have bulldogs. They're the most judgy breed of dog I've ever come across. And I've got 3 of them. Like, seriously, they're just, they're epic. They are epic, but they're beautiful. They do make up for it, but they are judgy.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. They're unusual. Yeah. But I definitely think animal therapy is just incredible. Incredibly strong.
I mean, and that's something that I'd, advocate for as well.
Definitely.
So you've highlighted a number of things that could be important for someone with a new diagnosis of FND. So it's really finding your team, like your medical crew around you, like who are going to be the right people to help you on the journey.
Yes.
Having your supportive family and friends around you.
Yes.
And I guess it's being creative, like, if something doesn't work, giving something else a go.
Thinking outside of the box.
Yeah.
Which, look, is easier said than done, especially when you're in the throes of seizures and tics and syncope and all of those kind of really, really ugly symptoms. Thinking outside the box is not something that, you know, a lot of us had mental capacity for, on top of just trying to
survive,
live and focus day to day. It's very hard. I'm very lucky in the fact that I haven't returned to work. I am a housewife. I will be the first to admit I'm not exactly the best housewife, because I get distracted and I start a million tasks and end up with a million piles around the house. But that is a very ADHD type thing. However, I didn't have that additional pressure on me. Like, my husband runs his own business. He's a personal trainer, and he now also works with a number of people with FND to help get them back to a place where they have a professional in his field that knows what he's working with.
Exactly. Brings that valuable lived experience.
Absolutely.
Makes a difference.
So, you know, I'm very proud of him. You know, a lot of people with FND have come because they've heard through the grapevine that he does understand what he's talking about. I am very, I was always told, like, right at the beginning, look, within 2 years, it's likely you'll end up in a wheelchair.
Oh, wow. You're given
and that was what my neurologist told me. And that was where the stubbornness came from.
Yeah. And look, the mind can be quite powerful. Like, if you're told that, if you accept that, or sort of accept that what the doctor says is God and that's your prediction, you'll follow that course.
Yeah.
And so it's not handing all your power over.
It's allowing your brain to make the choice. And at no point did I ever think that that was even in my journey. Never.
And then it hasn't been, has it?
No, not at all.
Yeah, that's great.
You know, the only time a wheelchair even poked its ugly head out was when I shattered my kneecap. That was it. I was walking 2 days after surgery. I was there was no way on God's green earth for me.
And everyone's different, and everyone's got different comorbidities that intersect with FND.
Absolutely.
So, and often I find it's, you know, the comorbidities that can make a big difference in the outcome as well.
Definitely.
But, you know, you mentioned sort of being healthy and fit beforehand, so that would have been really helpful, whereas some people are not.
And
that can change their outcomes.
I don't think I've met anyone else that's kind of had a similar story to mine. But I also don't think I've met any two individuals that have kind of had a similar story.
Everyone's really individual, because, you know, they sort of talk about, you know, biopsychosocial. There's so many things that impact our body and that impact our brain. So, you know, there's things that sort of facilitate a good prognosis outcome and things that a weaker prognosis outcome. So we know that people with physical health or past mental health comorbidities, past traumas, like their brain might be more vulnerable, and they might not have such a good outcome. But it's also the mindset and how you, I guess, take the challenges can make a difference. Like, sort of like, be a victim to your circumstance or make the best of your circumstance as well.
I like to look at day-to-day life as a challenge. Not a challenge, an adventure. And the adventure's what you make of it.
Absolutely.
I firmly believe we live one life, and life is what we make it. And that's not to say that we don't get dealt shitty cards sometimes, because we really do. But I was young. I was 29 when this first kind of reared its ugly head, and, you know,
it's a shock on a young person, isn't it?
It was.
You know, you sort of think you're young and you're healthy and you're fit and you can push your body to the extremes, but this sort of comes shutting down in your body and
It
you're like,
really does.
what does my future hold for me?
And that was the question I asked the most over those first 3 months.
Yeah.
Was, what does my future look like? Do I even have a future?
Yeah.
You know, I went to some very, very deep and ugly mental health places that
Yeah.
I never thought I would be the emotionally vulnerable mental health. That was never me.
Yeah.
Never. I was happy. I was happy go lucky. I was, you know, I was the crazy friend that, you know, picked up a lot of other people when they weren't happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I didn't really know how to deal with it until it was me.
Yeah.
And my biggest tool was my stubbornness and my absolute my mum has always known how to get the most out of me. When I was 7 years old and I had picked jujitsu as the activity I did, I never wanted to do dancing or be a ballerina. I was not that little girl. I wanted to do jujitsu. And my mum said to me at 7, I will get you the uniform, but you have to give me 2 belts. So there's, you know, you can't choose next week or the week after that you don't want to do it anymore. She also told me that those kind of things when I said I wanted to play the cello. I'll get you a cello, but you have to give me a year of lessons. 5 years later at high school, still playing the cello.
Yeah.
And every time I said to her, I want to do something, she was like, well, this is what you have to give to me as a minimum. And I would kick those out of the ballpark because be stuffed if I was ever just going to reach a minimum level.
Yeah.
I was very stubborn. I was very bright. I didn't have to try well at school to do well. I didn't have to work hard. And that's, I think, why when I got my corporate job and I worked hard, because I wanted to prove that even though I didn't need to, I could.
Yeah.
If I pushed myself. And you know, one of my roles, I was getting international awards from being just good at my job. And I'm like, to me, I was sitting there going, it's my job. You know, this is what I'm meant to be doing.
Yeah.
But I didn't look at the harm it was doing in the long run.
Yeah.
You don't when you're a kid.
You don't, because you sort of feel like you can do anything. I can remember my mum saying,
invincible.
you're burning the candle at both ends. I'm like, I'm fine, you know.
I felt like I was invincible.
Yeah. Yeah.
But FND is a part of my story. It's always going to be there.
Yeah.
I do not for a second think I have found a miracle cure, because I haven't. But I am able to live my life a lot better now than I ever was from the beginning of my diagnosis.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not to say I don't wake up and have some surprise bad days, because I do. But the bad days are a lot more manageable. They are a lot less frequent. And they're not as intensely scary.
Yeah.
Because I think for me, the fear factor was pretty high.
Yeah, it is. It is for everyone, because the symptoms are so new, they're so overwhelming, they're so different.
So broad.
Yeah.
So weird.
Yeah. So that is what can be so scary at the beginning. But, you know, later on when you've got a grasp on the symptoms, oh, it's just this, I need to have a more of a restful day.
Yeah.
You're sort of more in control, and that's really important. It's really, you know, long term how you manage it and adapting your life to accommodate this condition so that you can still live a good life.
Yes.
Yeah, even with it, FND. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we might wrap it up there, but thanks so much for sharing your journey and your unique insights along the way. And hopefully that'll help some people on their journey for FND.
I hope so. I do, because it doesn't have to be as lonely, scary, isolating. It doesn't. And it certainly doesn't have to be stigmatizing in a negative way. We choose how we absorb information. And if we allow every negative thing that anybody ever said to us be a negative thing or feel like a negative thing, we'll never control our world. But if we take stock to think about the actual words that are being said, not how it's said, but the words that are coming out, it's all in your head. Okay, cool. Well, what else is in my head? My brain. I don't think that neurologists, neuropsychiatrists, I don't think anybody that studies the brain is going to understand its full potential for many hundreds of years to come.
No, I think we've got a long way to go in understanding the brain. And it's really been, you know, the last sort of 9 years of FND research where there's been really any detailed understanding about what's happening in the brain.
Yeah.
And we'll gain more knowledge
about
it over time.
It was only 50 years ago that bipolar and all of that was referred to as mania. It's incredible what can happen in a relatively short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think we do have a long way to go in understanding the brain.
Yep.
Yeah, but in the meantime, it's being creative and trying to be positive and make the best out of a bad situation.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And rally your community, whatever it looks like.
And find your people, you know, find the health professionals that are going to be with you on the journey. Bring the people who are going to be with you.
And the ones that make you feel good.
Yeah.
You know, if there are people in your circle that don't make you feel good, then they don't have a place in your circle right now.
Yeah. And many people say that, like their friendship groups have changed since getting FND. They can't keep up with, you know, the people who they used to sort of have their friendships with. They can't keep up with that, and they've got to find new friendships.
And people like I was never a party animal or a drinker or anything like that. I've never actually been to a nightclub. You know, my whole life, never been interested. But my friends from back then, because I didn't share the same interests anymore, and it's not that I didn't share them, it was that I couldn't really do them. A lot of them dropped off. But I had to acknowledge that it wasn't because of me. It was just because life took us in different directions. And that's okay. There's no animosity. It's life.
They're in your life.
And I'm sure if I was to reach out to a couple of them now, it would, you know, pick up where it left off. But you've got to do what's right by you. You cannot base your treatment, your nothing. It has to be about you. You have to be selfish when it comes to your treatment process. And that's not being selfish in a negative way. You know, it is okay to focus on you.
And that's, I think, something that a lot of people have been so much there for others, but not there for themselves. Like you spoke about, working really, really hard, working, long hours in the workplace, not necessarily looking after yourself. And
Yep.
we see that a lot. People have been there for others, but not there for themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it's sort of, this illness comes on and it forces you to make changes in your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, people can grow through that process.
Yeah. And look, some people can and some people can't, but there is always a chance for things to get better.
Yeah.
That you just need to, I needed somebody to put me in a headlock and say, get your head together. Think about this logically. Don't just assume that this is, it doesn't have to be the end of the world. It doesn't. Yes, things still look different for me in that I had to, when I designed our house, because I still have a brain. I'm still capable of doing things. It just took me longer to do.
Yeah.
And when I designed our house, I had to take into account some things that before FND I would never have thought of.
Yeah.
Simple things like we actually needed to be able to have access down to our house for a stretcher or a gurney, because I have had wonderful tumbles downstairs and things like that. There are things that I never thought that I'd have to think about, but I do.
Yeah.
And that's, by no means am I cured, but I've clawed back up an awful lot of my life.
Yeah.
And I will keep working towards that.
Yeah. It's an ongoing journey.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It's a journey that doesn't just stop.
Yeah, and it's not that, with what we spoke about right at the beginning is recovery. It's not, I was well, I got sick, I got better, I'm back to my normal life. It's a lifelong journey with FND.
Yeah. I like to think I got back to my normal life in that this is what my life looks like now normally. It doesn't look like it did when I was 16, but I'm also not 16 anymore.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like how I was at 20 or 25 or 30. Life's always changing.
Yeah, true. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much for your time and your lessons and learnings along your FND journey.
No worries, Kate. It's been lovely to chat.
Too.
And I just hope someone can connect with it.
Yeah.
I really do.
Yeah. Everyone's different, but we can all learn from each other.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Awesome.